Aokiji is not the 10th Titanic captain, and here's why. In Punk Hazard, Caesar makes a deadly gas which he's trying to sell to various people in the underworld through a live feed via transponder snail. Two of these people are directly connected to Yonko factions, with Pecons and Tamago representing Big Mum, and a person with horns who asks for Jack, representing Kaido. In both of these cases, the people working for Yonko factions set to view this video feed are below the level of Yonko commander, with obviously Pecons and Tamago, and the unnamed man who asks for Jack likely being a subordinate in Jack's fleet. So what does it say that Kuzan, who we later find out is working for Yonko Blackbeard, was also heavily implied to have been watching this same livestream? Does it not also imply that based on these other two examples, that Kuzan is similarly on a level below Yonko commander? There's also the fact that among the crew, there is shown to be a level of distrust around Kuzan. While Blackbeard acts like he has no issue with Kuzan in this conversation with Jesus Burgess, we can see from his later action of kidnapping Koby for an unknown reason that he likely does suspect Kuzan of being involved in Sword, which we as the audience also heavily suspect, and for good reason. The reason for kidnapping Koby, a confirmed member of Sword therefore, is likely to test Kuzan's loyalty in some way. Blackbeard in this scene is likely just being pragmatic and keeping his cards close to his chest, as Blackbeard is known to do, for the sake of settling a pointless argument with someone who isn't privy to his larger plans. So it's clear that among the other Titanic captains, as well as Blackbeard himself, who can ultimately make the call, that Kuzan isn't trusted, and specifically that he isn't trusted where someone like Shiryu is, the obvious common denominator being that they both used to work for the world government. If Shiryu, a confirmed Titanic captain, is trusted to a level that Kuzan isn't, well, if we translate this lower trust in Kuzan into a solid rank, would it not work out that Kuzan is at a lower rank than Shiryu, i.e., not a Titanic captain? However, none of these things are really concrete evidence per se. Kuzan could simply just have been watching the livestream despite being a Titanic captain, and just because the Blackbeard pirates trust Shiryu more than Kuzan doesn't mean that Kuzan can't be a Titanic captain. The lower level of trust could be simply made up for with how much of an asset Kuzan practically is to the team. And as for the alliance stuff, it could just be Oda not trying to make it completely obvious that Kuzan has fully joined the Blackbeard pirates, which would in turn lead to way more people guessing early on that Kuzan is the 10th. These things could give us further details as to the nature of Kuzan and the Blackbeard Pirates dynamic, or specifically why Kuzan isn't a Titanic captain, but aren't enough to suggest that Kuzan isn't a Titanic captain overall. The main reason why I think Kuzan isn't the 10th is simply the fact that the reveal of the 10th Titanic captain is set up to be just that, a reveal. And what would be the point of a reveal if everybody can easily guess what's behind the curtain, miles away from the reveal actually happening? Kuzan was said to have left the Marines in Fishman Island in 2011. Then, over the course of then until the end of Dressrosa, which took about 4 years, the mystery behind Kuzan's allegiances was slowly built up until we eventually got the reveal that Kuzan was aligned with Blackbeard, and ever since then Oda has left us in the dark. That is until very recently, where Oda has begun to show us Aokiji working directly for the Blackbeard pirates, alongside other Titanic captains, in ways that are very significant to the plot. This is a plot thread that Oda has been consistently reminding the audience of over the course of about 10 years. And at this point, Kuzan stands as the obvious choice for the 10th Titanic captain for 99% of readers, which is exactly why Kuzan's not going to be the 10th Titanic captain. Oda wants you to think that he is, which means that he probably won't be if he wants to make the reveal of the 10th, a mystery he also introduced roughly a decade ago, at all surprising, at all a reveal. Rather, I think Kuzan is simply a massive red herring, and what is the point of any red herring in a story if not to distract the audience from the real deal? By having something flashy and in your face, you don't notice anything else, and now, Oda can get away with being a lot more blatant with the foreshadowing for the real 10th Titanic captain, now that he knows he's got your attention elsewhere. So, who is the real 10th Titanic captain? Well, what do we actually know about the 10th? Next to nothing. However, we can work out a few things. For instance, when he joined Blackbeard. Blackbeard in 956, which is the last time we saw him in the pre-time skip, had himself and 9 crewmates, which would later all go on to be Titanic captains. So he didn't have his 10th here, as there simply isn't another person on his crew by this point that it could possibly be. We know that by the time of Dressrosa, which was barely a couple days after the post-time skip, Blackbeard had 10 Titanic captains, meaning he got his 10th Titanic captain after this scene, which was right before the time skip, and before this scene, which was right after. So essentially, we know that he got his 10th Titanic captain during the 2-year time skip. Now, what are the two things we know Blackbeard was involved in any capacity during the 2-year time skip where he would have got his 10th? The Rocky Port incident and the Payback War. Therefore, it stands to reason that he recruited his 10th during one of these two events. However, that's about as far as it goes. Everyone else we know was involved in the Rocky Port incident we have seen since, and can be pretty sure they aren't the 10th Titanic captain. The Payback War has the opposite problem. While we do know that many of the people involved, being the Whitebeard pirates, we don't know a thing about what happened to them after, other than of course Marco, who again, I'm pretty sure isn't. Meaning there literally isn't a thing I could say as to whether they'd be the 10th Titanic captain or not. So we have no information about any characters Blackbeard interacted with during the period he recruited his 10th, as we either know nothing about them and so can't make a call either way, or we have learned about them since and they're very unlikely to be the 10th. So is that it? Are we stumped? Do we simply have to wait around to learn more information on who this mysterious 10th commander could possibly be? No, and the reason is that there is actually one more event Blackbeard was involved in between these two scenes, that we the audience were shown firsthand, and that if Oda allowed to play out for just a few moments more, would almost have undoubtedly revealed the moment Blackbeard and his soon-to-be 10th Titanic captain first met, and it occurs right after this one. You see, while this may be the last we the audience see of Blackbeard in the pre-time skip, I don't believe it's his last scene chronologically. So, to give a quick recap, in this scene at the start of chapter 595, Blackbeard has captured Bonnie and is trying to trade her with the world government for a ship, after theirs broke shortly after entering the New World. After seeing just one navy ship coming towards them with a Kainu on it, they realise the world government likely just plans to capture both of them and so runs away, still without a ship. They obviously managed to escape unscathed, as we see a Kainu not bothering to pursue them after this point. However, they must have been able to escape the island somehow. The two questions we're left with after this scene seem to be A, how did Blackbeard escape the island, and B, did he ever end up getting a ship? Right, so now that you're up to date, I want to talk about this scene from the end of chapter 594, which, give or take one or two other pages, comes nearly right before the scene with Blackbeard. Urouge sees an island raining lightning and wonders how to get onto it, when his crew is approached by a small ship with what looks like around a dozen figures who are not revealed, save for one old woman dressed in a cloak, who asks the crew if they would like an umbrella, seemingly offering some form of protection against the lightning rain just like an umbrella would for normal rain. In my opinion, these are the Blackbeard pirates fresh after escaping from a Kainu. For starters, we know both Raijin Island and this unnamed island are both some of the first islands one can reach upon entering the New World from Fishman Island, and the fact that Oda intentionally clarified that for both of them means that it's probably important in some way. Maybe so that he can establish that the geography of Blackbeard's crew going from one island to the other on this little boat makes sense because the two islands are so close to each other. Secondly, this little boat would answer both the questions I mentioned earlier of how Blackbeard's crew got away as well as if they ever found a boat. The answer being that they did get away on a boat, however the boat was small enough to where it couldn't be clearly seen from the scene in chapter 595, and was also small enough to where they would still definitely be wanting for a bigger ship, as this one can barely fit all of them. And just the fact someone is sailing on such a tiny boat in the New World means it's probably quite temporary, and as such, the people riding it haven't been using it for very long. It also explains why they would be going to Urouge's crew in the first place. Blackbeard's crew are in need of a properly sized ship, and this is the first one they've seen after running from a Kainu, considering the two islands are near to each other. They offer an umbrella to Urouge's crew, i.e. a form of protecting themselves from the lightning rain on the island they're eyeing up, so that Urouge can let them onto the ship, to which Blackbeard can then attack them and take their ship, planning to do to one member of the worst generation what he just did to another. And it's also a simple explanation for the other silhouettes around this old woman. There looks to be around 10 or so, the same amount as Blackbeard's crew. They all seem roughly average sized, which would line up with Blackbeard's crew, save for one, which I'll get to in a minute. And it explains why Oda would want to keep them not only in shadow, but also show them from such a distance, as their silhouettes would likely be extremely recognizable to the audience. As for San Juan Wolf, well, we know he has an unnamed paramecia power that allows him to change size, so he's probably just on the ship as well. But then, who is this old woman? Well, I believe it's Katarina Devon. We know Katarina Devon has a power that allows her to transform into people she's touched, which includes their clothes. However, that excuse could be used to say Katarina Devon is literally anyone, so is there anything else? Well, what little we know about Katarina Devon is that she kills women she considers to be more beautiful than herself. A very similar character archetype to someone like the Evil Queen from Snow White, someone who also disguised themselves as an old woman in a cloak, providing a useful gift to someone on the surface, meanwhile secretly intending their downfall. So, if this is Katarina Devon and these are the Blackbeard pirates, why is that relevant? Well, like I mentioned earlier, it makes this another scene between the two plot points where Blackbeard must have recruited his 10th Titanic captain, and considering it's the only one that Oda has shown so far in any capacity, it may be the most important one for this purpose. So let's stop stalling. You've seen the title, you've seen the thumbnail. I personally believe that Urouge is the 10th Titanic captain, and that this was the moment right before he was recruited. So firstly, let's go over some basic stuff. Firstly, all of the major Blackbeard pirates have an ugly, sleazy, unkempt, or generally pirate-like appearance, and Urouge certainly has that. He's also certainly strong enough. He's a member of the worst generation and has defeated another Yonko commander, which in a power scaling sense roughly puts him on the same level of strength as, say, a Yonko commander, so wouldn't it make sense if he literally is one too? He's also got the same kind of impish, twisted personality that Blackbeard and a lot of his commanders have too, so he would fit in character-wise. He is confirmed to have a devil fruit power, which lines up with Law's statement in 1063 that all of Blackbeard's commanders now have devil fruit powers. And speaking of Law said at the start of Punk Hazard that to survive as a pirate in the New World, you either ally yourself with a Yonko or challenge one, and this is true for literally every member of the worst generation that we know about so far, all except for Urouge. Now, it's true that Urouge has challenged a Yonko crew before when he defeated Charlotte Snack. However, the first time we see him in the post-time skip, he's been in the New World for 2 years and survived, which means by this point he must have taken one of these two paths. And it's in this very scene where he has a Yonko literally right in front of him and decidedly does nothing to challenge him. Therefore, it's likely that he instead chose the former and allied himself with a Yonko instead. And of the 4 emperors at the time of this scene, Big Mom, Kaido, Shanks and Blackbeard, we have basically cleared him of Big Mom and Kaido, so that only leaves Shanks and Blackbeard with crews yet to be fully explored. And even with Shanks, we know all 10 of his Yonko commanders, and none of them are Urouge, despite the fact he's clearly been positioned as comparable in strength to a Yonko commander. Meanwhile, we have Blackbeard, who has a 10th commander slot mysteriously missing. Does the shoe not fit? There's also the fact that he's seemingly been positioned as subordinate to a larger captain-like figure before in Enel, where I believe he was Enel's 5th priest, that betrayed him and left before the Straw Hats reached Skypiea. For starters, there's the parallel between Enel and Im. Both are propped up as false gods who stand unchallenged in power at the apex of their respective seas, can detect the voices of anyone exposing them and can destroy the ground they stand on in an instant with a single lightning attack. Im has the Gorosei and Enel has the priests, which act as a rank in between their god and anyone else, who direct orders considered too insignificant for the big one. Yet the parallel, which has been so consistent so far, is bizarrely halted by the fact that Im has 5 Gorosei and Enel has 4. It would be so easy to give them the same number when there's already such a parallel being drawn between them, so you have to wonder why Oda did this. Well, what if there were originally 5 priests of Enel too? And it's not too hard to imagine that there could have once been a subordinate of Enel who later left for whatever reason. Enel is blatantly evil and doesn't work to build a good relationship with any of his subordinates, so someone would clearly have the motivation to leave. Adding to that, Enel himself barely cares at all for even his most trusted subordinates and has no problem killing those who either fail or dissent him, so it wouldn't be out of character for Enel to dispose of a priest. But wait, there's more. The entrance to the upper yard causes travellers to go through a gate where they have to pick one of 4 trials, each of which are carried out by one of Enel's 4 priests. However, if you look closely, there exists a place for a 5th gate to exist, where instead of a gate there's just a rock with what looks like the tops of the other 4 gates. All this is to say, it seems like there was once a 5th trial with a 5th priest to go along with it that was then later sunk at a later point. This in turn alluding to there once being a 5th priest with their own trial along with it. So, why was this 5th priest Urouge? Well, for starters, Urouge is from an unnamed sky island. The question is, which sky island was Urouge from? Burka. The one Enel and his forces came from and later wiped out 8 years before the present day. We know this because Urouge's curved wings are a shape only found in Enel's forces, save for Enel himself, likely because that's the shape of the wings of the Burka people where Enel's forces are all from. So the fact that Urouge is from Burka but obviously still alive implies that, as Enel succeeded in wiping every Burkan out save for his own men, Urouge was one of those men, hence him being able to survive the attack. There's also the simple fact that Urouge's crewmates call him a priest, and his crew named the Fallen Monk Pirates could relate to Urouge quote-unquote falling from the graces of God down to the blue sea. Urouge also reacts negatively when he sees a storm of lightning. This is actually one of the 2 times he doesn't smile in the whole series, as it likely reminds him of Enel and specifically the destruction of Burka, as this is the only piece of characterization for Urouge we could possibly apply as to his reason for leaving Enel, rather than something random like him failing a mission. I'm just going to assume that this was the reason Urouge left. So the story goes, he was already serving Enel and Burka for a time. Perhaps Enel manipulated his religious nature into believing that Enel was a real god. 8 years ago, Enel destroyed Burka, and Urouge may have stayed with him a little while longer to save his own skin, at least long enough for a trial to be built in his name in Skypiea. But at some point between 8 and 2 years ago, he left after being disgusted with what Enel did to his home. He assumedly left alone, considering none of his crew today have the wings of the Sky People. The point of me giving you this little backstory is because it shows that despite being a captain of his own crew today, Benkei, Urouge started off in a position much more similar to a Yonko commander, in charge of his own individual army, but still ultimately subservient to a greater captain, so it wouldn't be so surprising if towards the end of his arc, he once again took up that same role, only this time to Blackbeard, who has a consistent thematic around the number 3, most interestingly with the 3 skulls on his flag. Other times we see the motif of the 3 skulls in the series includes Oars and Top Musica from Film Red, both of which are also referred to as the Devil, so the fact that Blackbeard has 3 skulls as part of his flag means that Odo is likening him to the Devil also, and this would create a really cool dynamic should Urouge end up following Blackbeard. Urouge started off as the 5th of God's 5 priests, however after turning away from God he was cast out of heaven, and now as a fallen monk was sent down to the Blue Sea, where after some time he would once again take up the role of a commander under someone else, this time becoming the 10th of Blackbeard's 10 Titanic captains, Blackbeard who was himself linked with the Devil, thus completing Urouge's arc as a man who fell from grace, starting his life by serving God and ending it by serving the Devil. The final thing I want to talk about is the real-life inspiration for Urouge. Urouge seems to have been inspired by a man called Musashiba Benkei, a Japanese warrior monk from the 12th century, notable for his giant size, who believed against weapons like blades and so fought many samurai he believed to be unworthy, taking their blades from them in the process. He himself wielded giant metal poles, which was said to be the only thing that didn't look too small when he wielded them. Linking this back to Urouge, he is obviously also a warrior monk. He's also a giant, he's the tallest of the supernova and also has a devil fruit, which seems to increase his size. Urouge is first introduced in the story by fighting Murder Machine Killer, a man obsessed with his blades. These are all the parallels between Urouge and Benkei that we definitely know exist. However, while Urouge's story may currently be only half complete, Benkei's story is fully complete, and so we can look to the latter half of Benkei's story to predict the latter half of Urouge's. Later in life, Benkei was finally defeated by a legendary warrior named Minamoto Yoshitsune, and from then on Benkei swore loyalty to this man and became a soldier in Yoshitsune's army out of respect. Yoshitsune was later betrayed in battle by members of said army that were close to him, and Benkei was one of the few to stay loyal to Yoshitsune to the very end, ultimately dying for it. So, if we're continuing to draw a parallel between Benkei and Urouge, the connections go as follows. Urouge, after initially gaining notoriety and after his phase of defeating people for their weapons, was defeated by an even more powerful and notorious fighter, which resulted in Urouge then joining that person's army out of respect, only for people in this more powerful fighter's army to later betray him, with Urouge being one of the few to stick to this person to the end. If we're continuing the parallel with Benkei, then Urouge would be one of the few of Blackbeard's army to stick with him till the end. So why would this be? It isn't likely to be anything Blackbeard himself did to Urouge, as if Blackbeard was the type of person to cultivate genuine loyalty and respect among his crew, then the majority of his crew wouldn't have ended up betraying him in the first place. Rather, it's more likely something to do with Urouge himself. I think Urouge will stick with Blackbeard because of his previous experience with Enel. If Urouge truly was the 5th of Enel's priests that later betrayed him, and Urouge is being set up through the parallel with Yoshitsune to specifically not betray his next leader, then this would form a character arc, where perhaps Urouge on some level feels guilty for betraying his previous leader, and so now that he's been given a second chance in Blackbeard, refuses to do so again. As for Benkei dying, I'm not sure about that, as it is One Piece after all. However, dying in Benkei's story could simply mean being defeated in One Piece, which would result in his will being crushed, etc. And if you're still not convinced after all that, here's a panel of Urouge at Marineford from 572. Yeah. So we have no information regarding any characters Blackbeard interacted during the interacted with, fuck me. The answer being that they did get away on a boat. No, fuck, please. He is a member of the worst generation and has defeated another Yonko commander, which in a power scaling and he only defeated one Yonko commander. Fucking fucked. And can destroy the ground they stand on in an instant with a single lightning attack. Hey yo, boss. Hey yo, boss. Pirates could relate to Urouge. Roche? What the fuck? This is actually one of the 2 times he doesn't smile and is actually likely